The schoolhouse door slammed open with such force that Martha Finley's carefully arranged wildflowers toppled from the windowsill, scattering across the worn floorboards like accusations. 3 women stood in the doorway, their faces twisted with righteous fury, and behind them gathered half the town of Agua Caliente, Arizona, their expressions ranging from curiosity to condemnation. "We know what you did," Constance Whitmore announced, her voice carrying across the single room where Martha had spent the last 8 months teaching 23 children their letters and numbers. "We know about the money missing from the church collection, and we know you took it." Martha's hands stilled on the slate where she had been writing tomorrow's arithmetic lesson. The chalk dropped from her fingers, leaving a small white cloud as it hit the floor. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought surely everyone could hear it. "I did no such thing," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I have never stolen anything in my life." "Liar." The word came from Beatrice Hammond, the banker's wife, whose daughter sat in the 3rd row every morning. "My husband saw you leaving the church last Thursday evening alone after everyone else had gone. The money disappeared that very night." "I was returning hymnals," Martha protested, stepping forward. "Reverend Sullivan asked me to organize them. He can verify—" "The Reverend is away visiting his sister in Tucson," Constance interrupted. "How convenient for you. And this was found in your desk drawer this morning." She held up a silver brooch, the one that had belonged to Eleanor Morrison, the mayor's wife, reportedly stolen from her dressing room 2 weeks prior. The garnets caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Martha felt the blood drain from her face. "That is not mine. I have never seen it before. Someone must have planted it there." "Of course you would say that," Beatrice said, her mouth a thin line of disapproval, "but the evidence speaks for itself. We will not have a thief teaching our children. You have until sunset to leave Agua Caliente. If you are still here come morning, we will have the sheriff arrest you." The crowd murmured in agreement, a low rumble of voices that made Martha's stomach turn. She looked from face to face, searching for anyone who might speak in her defense, but even those who had smiled at her kindly just yesterday now looked away. Fear tasted like copper in her mouth. "Please," she said, hating the desperation in her voice, "please just let me speak to the sheriff myself. Let me explain." "The sheriff agrees with us," Constance said coldly. "He said to tell you not to make this harder than it needs to be. Pack your things and go." They filed out then, leaving Martha standing alone in the schoolhouse that had become her home, her purpose, her whole world since she had arrived from Philadelphia 8 months ago. The autumn light fell across the empty desks, across the primers she had ordered with her own money, across the map of the United States she had hung on the wall to show the children how vast their country was. She had nowhere to go. Her parents were dead, her brother stationed with the cavalry in Montana. She had used her entire savings to make the journey west, answering an advertisement for a teacher in a growing Arizona Territory town. The position had promised room, board, and $30 a month. She had thought it was the beginning of a new life. Martha moved mechanically, taking down her few dresses from the pegs on the wall of the small room behind the schoolhouse where she slept. She folded them into her trunk, along with her books, her mother's quilt, the daguerreotype of her family taken before the fever had claimed her parents. Her hands shook as she worked, and twice she had to stop to wipe tears from her eyes. The sun was lowering toward the western mountains when she finally carried her trunk outside and loaded it onto the small cart the school board had provided for transporting supplies. The town's old mare, Betsy, stood hitched and waiting, as if someone had anticipated her departure. The thought made her anger flare through the fear. Someone had done this deliberately. Someone had planted that brooch and spread lies about the church money. But who? And why? She had been nothing but kind to everyone, had worked hard to earn the trust of the families who sent their children to her. She had even started a lending library using her own books to begin with, and had organized a spelling bee that had brought the whole town together in laughter and competition just last month. None of it mattered now. Martha climbed onto the cart, took up the reins, and guided Betsy toward the road that led north out of town. She did not look back. She could not bear to see the place that had rejected her so completely, so unjustly. The desert stretched before her, vast and uncaring, the saguaro cacti standing like silent witnesses to her disgrace. She had gone perhaps 3 miles, following the rutted track toward the main road that would eventually lead to Tucson, when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Martha's first thought was that they had changed their minds, that the sheriff was coming to arrest her after all. She urged Betsy to move faster, but the old mare could barely manage a trot. The rider came alongside her, and Martha finally turned to look, her heart in her throat. The man on the big bay horse was not the sheriff. He was Ethan Forrester, the cowboy who worked at the Triple Bar Ranch just outside of town. She had seen him at church on Sundays, had noticed the way he always removed his hat when he passed her on the street, the quiet courtesy in his manner. He was perhaps 26 or 27, tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water. "Miss Finley," he called out, touching his hat. "Hold up a minute, won't me, please?" Martha pulled on the reins, stopping the cart. Betsy seemed grateful for the respite. "Mr. Forrester," she said, trying to keep her voice level, "I am leaving as instructed. There is no need to see me off." He brought his horse closer, and she could see the concern etched in his weathered features. He spent his days outside, that much was clear from the sun-darkened skin and the lines at the corners of his eyes. "That's just it, Miss Finley. I don't think you should be leaving at all. What they did back there, it wasn't right. It wasn't justice." Something in Martha's chest loosened slightly at his words. "You believe me? You do not think I am a thief?" "No, madam, I do not." His voice was firm, certain. "I was in church the day you organized those hymnals. I'd come back to fetch my Bible, left it in the pew. You were there working, careful as anything, treating those books like they were precious. That is not the behavior of someone planning to steal. And I know you would not take Mrs. Morrison's brooch. I have watched you with the children, seen how honest you are, how you make them own up to their mistakes and tell the truth. You practice what you preach." Martha felt fresh tears prick her eyes, but these were different, born of gratitude rather than despair. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saying that. But it changes nothing. They have made up their minds, and I have no way to prove my innocence." Ethan shifted in his saddle, his leather creaking. "I think you do. I think someone set you up, and I think I know who might have reason to do it, but I need time to prove it. Come back to town with me." "I cannot," Martha said, shaking her head. "They will arrest me, and even if they do not, the shame of it, the accusations, I cannot bear it." "Then I will come with you," Ethan said simply. "I will ride with you wherever you are going, and I will find the proof we need, and then I will bring you back, and you will have your reputation restored and your position returned to you." Martha stared at him. This man she barely knew, who was offering to upend his own life for her sake. "Why would you do that? You do not know me. We have barely spoken a dozen words to each other." Ethan looked away for a moment, toward the mountains that rose purple and gold in the distance. When he turned back, there was something vulnerable in his expression, something that made her breath catch. "I know enough," he said quietly. "I know you are a good person and a good teacher. I know those children need you, my niece and nephew among them. My sister's kids, they come home every day talking about what Miss Finley taught them, about how you make learning exciting. And I know what it is like to be accused of something you did not do, to have people turn against you without hearing your side. It happened to me once, back in Texas. If someone had stood up for me then, maybe things would have been different." There was a story there, Martha could tell, pain buried beneath his words. But this was not the time to ask about it. The sun was sinking lower, and if she was going to make it to any kind of shelter before full dark, she needed to keep moving. "I am going to Tucson," she said finally. "I have a cousin there, married to a merchant. I have not seen her in years, but perhaps she will take me in until I can figure out what to do next." Tucson is 4 days' ride, Ethan said. Maybe 5 with that cart. You will need supplies and someone to watch your back. The road is not always safe, especially for a woman traveling alone. Martha wanted to protest, to tell him she could manage on her own, but the truth was she was terrified. She had never traveled through this wild country without the safety of a stagecoach. She had no gun, no real knowledge of how to survive in the desert if something went wrong. And the thought of having someone beside her, someone who believed in her innocence, was so appealing she could barely stand it. "What about your work at the ranch?" she asked. "Will they not miss you?" "I will send word," Ethan said. "My boss, Mr. Peterson, he is a fair man. He will understand. And if he does not, well, I can find work elsewhere. But I cannot stand by and let you ride off into danger alone, not when I know you have been wronged." Martha made her decision. "Very well," she said. I accept your help, Mr. Forrester, and I thank you for it, more than I can say." "Ethan," he said, flashing her a quick smile that transformed his serious face, "if we are going to be traveling together for several days, we ought to use first names, and I will call you Martha, if that suits you." "It does," Martha said, and despite everything, she found herself smiling back. They rode on together as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of crimson and gold. Ethan explained that there was a small settlement about 10 miles up the road where they could stop for the night, a place with a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, who would not ask too many questions. Martha listened to his steady voice describing the route, the landmarks they would pass, and felt some of her panic begin to subside. When darkness fell, complete and spangled with more stars than Martha had ever seen in Philadelphia, Ethan produced a lantern from his saddlebag and lit it, hanging it from a pole on the cart so they could see the road ahead. The desert night was cool, almost cold after the heat of the day, and Martha wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a long stretch of silence filled only with the creak of the cart wheels and the steady clopping of hooves. "Anything?" Ethan replied. "What happened in Texas? You mentioned being accused of something." He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he sighed, a sound that seemed to come from deep in his chest. "I was 22 working on a ranch outside San Antonio. The owner's son took a liking to a girl who worked in the house, but she did not return his feelings. She preferred me, and we started courting in secret. When he found out, he was furious. A prize horse went missing from the stable, and he claimed I had stolen it to sell to get money to run away with the girl. The sheriff believed him because his father was rich and influential. I had to leave town in the middle of the night to avoid being lynched. Lost the girl, lost my job, lost my good name." "That is terrible," Martha said, her heart aching for him. "What happened to the girl?" "I do not know," Ethan said. "I heard she married a shopkeeper a year later. I hope she is happy. But I never forgot what it felt like. That helplessness. That rage at being judged without any chance to defend myself. So when I saw them doing the same thing to you today, I could not let it happen again. Not if there was something I could do to help." Martha reached out impulsively and touched his arm where it rested on the pommel of his saddle. "You are a good man, Ethan Forrester." "I try to be," he said softly. "Though the world does not always make it easy." They reached the settlement just before midnight. Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a low adobe building with a stable out back. The widow herself answered their knock, a tiny woman with silver hair pulled back in a bun and sharp dark eyes that took in the situation immediately. "You need rooms," she said. It was not a question. "2 rooms, please," Ethan said, "and stabling for the horses and the cart, if you have space." "I have space," Mrs. Chen said. "Pay in the morning. You look exhausted, both of you. Come." She led them inside down a narrow hallway lit by oil lamps and showed them to 2 small but clean rooms side by side. Martha's had a narrow bed with a quilt, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the dark bulk of the mountains. It seemed like heaven after the emotional devastation of the day. "Thank you," Martha said to Mrs. Chen, and then again to Ethan when the older woman had gone, "for everything." "Get some rest," Ethan said. We have a long ride tomorrow, and Martha, do not lose hope. We will figure this out, I promise you." She wanted to believe him. As she lay down on the bed, still wearing her dress, too tired even to change into her nightgown, Martha closed her eyes and tried to hold on to the memory of his conviction, his certainty. Someone in Agua Caliente had deliberately destroyed her life, but she had an ally now, unexpected and steadfast. Perhaps that would be enough. Sleep claimed her quickly, though her dreams were troubled, full of accusing faces and the endless stretch of the road ahead. Morning came too soon, announced by the crowing of a rooster somewhere nearby. Martha washed her face in the basin, changed into a fresh dress, and braided her honey-colored hair into a practical plait down her back. When she emerged from her room, she found Ethan already waiting in the small dining room, a cup of coffee in his hands. "Morning," he said, standing when he saw her. "Mrs. Chen has eggs and bread. You should eat before we head out." The food was simple but good, and Martha ate more than she expected, her body apparently having decided that despair was no excuse for skipping breakfast. Ethan ate efficiently, like a man used to fueling himself for hard work, and discussed the route with Mrs. Chen, who provided some useful information about water sources along the way. When they were ready to leave, Ethan paying for the rooms in the stable with coins from his pocket, Mrs. Chen took Martha aside. "That man," she said, nodding toward Ethan, "he has a good heart. You are safe with him. Trust that." "I do," Martha said, surprising herself with the truth of it. She had known Ethan for less than a day, and yet she did trust him, perhaps more than she had trusted anyone in a long time. The morning ride was cooler, the sun not yet high enough to bake the desert. They followed the main road north, passing occasional travelers heading south, freight wagons hauling goods between Tucson and the smaller settlements, a family in a covered wagon pursuing their own dreams in this unforgiving land. Ethan told her about his life as they rode, filling the long hours with stories. He had been born in Missouri, come west with his parents when he was 14, seeking better opportunities. His father had died of pneumonia 2 winters later, his mother of a broken heart 6 months after that, or so Ethan believed. He had been on his own since he was 16, working ranches, learning the cattle business, sending money to his sister when he could. She had married young, to a man who owned a small farm outside Agua Caliente, and had 2 children now, a boy of 8 and a girl of 6. "They are the reason I noticed you in the first place," Ethan admitted, as the sun climbed higher. "My nephew Samuel, he struggled with reading, hated it, said the letters jumped around on the page. My sister was beside herself with worry. And then you came to town, and within a month you had figured out that if he traced the letters with his finger while he read, they stayed still for him. You made him a special primer with extra large print. He can read now, really read." My sister cried when he read her a whole page without stopping. Martha felt warmth spread through her chest at the memory. "Samuel is a bright boy. He just needed a different approach. I am so glad it helped." "You helped?" Ethan corrected. "You cared enough to try something new, to see him as an individual rather than just one of the crowd. That is rare, Martha. That is valuable. That is why what happened to you is such a damn shame. Pardon my language." "No pardon needed," Martha said. "I agree with the sentiment, if not the word choice." He laughed at that, a genuine sound that made her smile despite the circumstances. They stopped at midday beside a small creek that cut through the desert, providing a ribbon of green in the brown landscape. Ethan had brought food from Mrs. Chen, wrapped bundles of bread and cheese and dried apples. They sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree and ate while the horses drank from the creek. "Can I ask you something now?" Ethan said, his tone careful. "Turnabout is fair," Martha replied. "Ask." "Why did you come west? Philadelphia is a long way from Arizona territory. You could have taught in a city school, had more comfort, more society." Martha was quiet for a moment, watching the water flow past, carrying leaves and small sticks on its journey. "I needed to leave," she said finally. "After my parents died, everything in Philadelphia reminded me of them. Every street, corner, every shop, every church. The grief was suffocating. And my brother, he wrote such exciting letters about the West, about the open spaces and the new possibilities. I wanted some of that for myself. I wanted to be somewhere I could breathe, somewhere I could make a difference. A friend showed me the advertisement for a teacher in Agua Caliente, and it seemed like fate, a new start in a new place. And then they took it away from you, Ethan said, anger threading through his voice. Yes, Martha said simply, but I will not let them destroy me. I will figure out how to move forward somehow. We will figure it out, Ethan corrected, together. That word, together, settled into Martha's heart like a promise. They rode through the afternoon, the heat building until the air shimmered over the road. Martha's dress clung to her back with perspiration, and she envied Ethan his wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face. He noticed her discomfort and offered her a kerchief to soak in water from his canteen and drape over her neck. It helps, he assured her, and he was right. The cool dampness was a blessed relief. As the sun began its descent, Ethan pointed to a cluster of buildings in the distance. That is Redstone, he said. Not much of a town, but they have a hotel of sorts. We can stay there tonight, get a proper meal. Redstone was indeed small, barely more than a few dozen buildings clustered around a crossroads, but the hotel was sturdy, run by a gruff man with one arm who asked no questions when Ethan paid for 2 rooms. The dining room served beef stew that was surprisingly good, thick with vegetables, and seasoned with something Martha could not quite identify but enjoyed. Ethan was quieter that evening, and Martha sensed he was thinking hard about something. When they finished eating, he leaned forward, his voice low. I have been mulling over who might have done this to you. It has to be someone with access to the schoolhouse, someone who could plant that brooch without being seen. And it has to be someone who had a reason to want you gone. Martha had been thinking about the same thing. I cannot imagine who would hate me so much. I've tried to be friendly to everyone to stay out of local disputes. Maybe that is the problem, Ethan said slowly. Maybe you did not stay out of something as much as you thought. Think back over the last few weeks. Did you witness anything? Overhear anything? Refuse to do something someone asked? Martha frowned, searching her memory. Nothing significant. Mrs. Whitmore asked me to give her son better marks than he earned, but I explained that I had to be fair to all the students. She seemed to accept that, though she was not pleased. Constance Whitmore, Ethan mused. She was one of the women who confronted you. Maybe she holds a grudge. But why go to such lengths? And the missing church money, how does that connect? Ethan drummed his fingers on the table. Unless it was not just about you, maybe someone took that money. And when they realized people would start asking questions, they decided to make you the scapegoat. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone, get the money, and get rid of you. That is devious, Martha said, but the logic made sense. Who has access to the church funds? The Reverend, obviously, but he is away. His wife, Prudence Sullivan. The church treasurer, which I think is Harold Hammond, the banker. And anyone on the church board, which includes the mayor, Constance Whitmore's husband, and a few others. So several people, Martha said, her heart sinking. How will we ever prove anything? I have an idea, Ethan said, but it requires me going back to Agua Caliente alone, asking some questions quietly. You would need to stay here for a few days, out of sight. Can you do that? The thought of Ethan leaving her, even temporarily, sent a spike of fear through Martha, but she could see the determination in his eyes, the plan forming. If you think it will help, yes, I can stay here. It will help, Ethan said. I need to talk to some people who might not talk freely if you were there, and I need to look around, see what I can find. Give me 3 days. I will be back by then with answers. Martha nodded, though her stomach churned with anxiety. Be careful, Ethan. If someone is willing to ruin my reputation, who knows what else they might do. I will be careful, he promised. You just keep your head down, do not draw attention. Tell the hotel keeper you are waiting for family to arrive from Tucson. That should explain why you are staying put. They went to their separate rooms then, and Martha lay awake for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Redstone at night, the distant laughter from a saloon, the bark of a dog, the whisper of wind against the windows. She thought about Ethan riding back toward Agua Caliente, toward potential danger, all because he believed in her innocence. It was more than anyone had ever done for her, and the weight of it was both humbling and frightening. Somewhere in the dark hours before dawn, she finally slept. Ethan was gone when Martha woke, though he had left a note under her door written in a careful hand that surprised her with its neatness. Gone to find the truth. Stay safe. Back soon. E. The days that followed were the longest of Martha's life. She stayed in her room mostly, reading the books she had packed in her trunk, venturing out only for meals in the hotel dining room. The one-armed proprietor, whose name was Mr. Garrett, seemed to accept her story about waiting for family without question. He brought her tea in the afternoons and made small talk about the weather, the state of the roads, the prospects for rain. On the second day, a freight wagon arrived in town, and Martha watched from her window as the driver unloaded crates and barrels. The everyday rhythm of life continued, indifferent to her turmoil. She wondered what the children in Agua Caliente were doing, whether they had found a new teacher yet, whether any of them missed her. The third day dawned hot and still. Martha paced her small room, trying not to imagine all the things that could have gone wrong. What if Ethan had been caught snooping? What if the real thief had accused him of something? What if he had simply decided it was too much trouble to help her after all and had returned to his ranch? That last thought she dismissed immediately. Ethan was not that kind of man. Whatever else she might doubt, she knew he would keep his word. Evening came, and with it a restless wind that rattled the shutters and carried the smell of dust and distant rain. Martha ate her dinner without tasting it, her eyes constantly drawn to the window, watching the road. Mr. Garrett noticed her distraction, but said nothing, simply refilled her water glass and left her alone. Full dark had fallen when she finally heard hoofbeats, the sound she had been waiting for. Martha rushed to the window and saw Ethan riding up to the hotel, his horse lathered and breathing hard. She flew downstairs, propriety forgotten, and met him in the lobby. "Ethan," she said, and was embarrassed by the relief that flooded her voice. "You're back. I was so worried." He looked tired, dusty from hard riding, but there was a light in his eyes that made her heart leap. "I found it, Martha. I found the proof." They went up to her room because it was more private, and Martha did not even think about the impropriety until they were inside with the door closed. But Ethan kept a respectful distance, pulling a chair to face the bed where she sat, and the excitement in his manner was entirely focused on his news. "I went back to Agua Caliente and started asking questions," he began, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Quiet questions to people I trust, my sister for one. She told me something interesting. About 2 months ago, she saw Mayor Morrison's wife, Eleanor, coming out of the school late one evening looking flustered. When Eleanor saw her, she made some excuse about dropping off books, but my sister said she seemed nervous, guilty almost. At the time, she thought nothing of it. But it stuck with her." "Eleanor Morrison," Martha said slowly. "But she is the one whose brooch was supposedly found in my desk. Why would she plant her own brooch?" "Because it was never stolen in the first place," Ethan said, his eyes bright with the thrill of discovery. "That is what I figured out. Eleanor reported it stolen, but I talked to her housekeeper, a woman named Rosa, who is sweet on one of the ranch hands at the Triple Bar. Rosa told me, in confidence, that Eleanor has been selling off her jewelry piece by piece for the past year. Her husband does not know. She has a gambling problem, Martha. She goes to a house in Tucson, plays cards, loses more than she can afford. She has been hiding it by selling her valuables and claiming they were stolen or lost." Martha's mind raced, connecting the pieces. "But what does that have to do with the church money?" "Everything," Ethan said, "because Eleanor is on the church board. She has access to the funds, and I think she took that money to cover her debts. But when Reverend Sullivan mentioned he would be going over the accounts when he returned from Tucson, Eleanor panicked. She needed a scapegoat. You. So she planted the brooch in my desk and spread the rumor about seeing me at the church, Martha said, anger and understanding flooding through her in equal measure. But why me? Why not blame someone else? Because you are an outsider, Ethan said gently. You have no family here. You have no deep ties. You are easy to run out of town. And if you left in disgrace, no one would listen to anything you might say in your own defense. It was cruel and calculated. Martha stood and walked to the window, her hands clenched into fists. How do we prove it? Rosa's word alone will not be enough, especially against the mayor's wife. No, Ethan agreed. But I did more than talk to Rosa. I rode to Tucson, to the gambling house she mentioned. It took some convincing and some money I could not really spare, but I got the owner to show me Eleanor Morrison's account book. She owes them over $300, Martha. Far more than a few pieces of jewelry would cover, and the dates match up. She made a payment to them last week, right after the church money went missing. Will the gambling house testify to that? Martha asked, though she suspected the answer. Not likely, Ethan admitted. They do not want that kind of attention from the law, but I have something else. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather notebook. I found this in the church office. I had to break in, God forgive me, but I found it. It is Eleanor's handwriting, a record of the money she has taken over the past 6 months disguised as legitimate expenses. She was keeping track, probably planning to pay it back somehow. It is not a full confession, but combined with everything else, it is damning. Martha took the notebook, her hands trembling. She opened it and saw the neat columns of figures, the dates, the small notations. It was exactly as Ethan described. This is it, she whispered. This is what we need. Yes, Ethan said. Now we just have to get the town to listen. The ride back to Agua Caliente took 2 days, and they spent every mile discussing strategy. Ethan argued for going straight to the sheriff, presenting the evidence, and forcing him to act. Martha worried that the sheriff, who had sided with Eleanor and the others before, would simply dismiss the notebook as a forgery or find some other excuse to ignore it. We need witnesses, she said as they made camp on the second night, beneath a sky so full of stars it looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. We need people willing to speak up, to question the official story. My sister will, Ethan said, and Rosa, if we can protect her from losing her position, and there are others in town who had doubts about your guilt but were too afraid to speak. If we can show them real evidence, they might find their courage. They sat by the small fire Ethan had built, the flames casting warm light on their faces. The night was cool, and Martha pulled her shawl tight around her shoulders. Ethan had given her his bedroll, insisting he would sleep on his saddle blanket, and the kindness of the gesture, like all his kindnesses over the past days, made her chest ache with something she was not quite ready to name. Ethan, she said quietly, why are you doing all this, really? I know you said you understood being falsely accused, but this is so much more than just sympathy. You have spent your own money, risked your job, broken into a church. Why? He was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Because when I saw you standing there in that schoolhouse with everyone against you, looking so brave and so lost, I felt something I have not felt in a long time. I felt like I had found something worth fighting for, not just because what happened to you was wrong, though it was, but because you are worth fighting for, Martha Finley. Her breath caught in her throat. Ethan, I am not asking for anything, he said quickly. I know this is not the time, and maybe you do not feel the same way. But I wanted you to know why I am doing this, because in the past week, riding beside you, talking with you, seeing your strength and your grace in the face of injustice, I have come to care for you deeply, more than is probably wise. But there it is. Martha's heart was hammering so hard she could barely hear the night sounds around them, the crackling of the fire, the distant call of a coyote. She thought about the past week, about how Ethan had made her feel safe when she should have felt abandoned, how his presence had been a constant comfort, how she had caught herself watching him when he did not know she was looking, admiring the capable way he handled the horses, the thoughtful expression on his face when he was working through a problem. "I do feel the same way," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it was just gratitude or circumstance, but it is more than that. You are the best thing that has happened to me in a very long time, Ethan, and I care for you too, deeply." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise, transforming every feature. He reached across the space between them and took her hand, his palm warm and calloused against hers. "Then we will see this through together," he said. "We will clear your name, and then if you are willing, we will see where this us might lead." "I am willing," Martha whispered, and she was. Despite everything, despite the uncertainty of what tomorrow would bring, she was absolutely certain of that. They held hands across the fire for a long time, talking quietly about their hopes and dreams, about the lives they wanted to build. Ethan told her about his dream of owning his own ranch someday, a small place where he could raise cattle and horses, be his own boss. Martha told him about wanting to continue teaching, about her belief that education could change lives, especially out here where opportunities were scarce for many children. "We could do both," Ethan said thoughtfully. "A ranch with a school. You could teach, and I could work the land. It would be hard, but good." "Yes," Martha said, letting herself imagine it, a small adobe house, a one-room school attached, children arriving on horseback or on foot for their lessons while cattle grazed in the distance. It would be good. When they finally settled down to sleep, Martha in the bedroll and Ethan a respectful distance away wrapped in his blanket, she lay awake for a while, listening to his breathing even out into sleep. For the first time since that terrible day when the women had come to the schoolhouse, she felt hope. They reached Agua Caliente in the late afternoon, riding in not with stealth but openly, deliberately. Ethan had decided that hiding would only make them look guilty. Instead, they went straight to the sheriff's office, a small building on the main street next to the general store. Sheriff Wilcox looked up from his desk with a startled expression when they walked in. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s, with a bushy mustache and a reputation for avoiding trouble when possible. "Miss Finley," he said, half rising from his chair, You were told to leave town." "I was run out of town on false charges," Martha said, her voice clear and strong, "and I have returned to prove my innocence. Mr. Forrester and I have evidence that exonerates me completely and points to the real thief." "Now wait just a minute," the sheriff began, but Ethan stepped forward and placed the notebook on the desk. "Sheriff, this is a record kept by Eleanor Morrison of money she embezzled from the church fund over the past 6 months. The dates and amounts match up with the missing funds. We also have testimony from her housekeeper about Mrs. Morrison's gambling debts and from the proprietor of a gambling establishment in Tucson about payments she made that correspond with the thefts." Sheriff Wilcox picked up the notebook reluctantly, as if it might bite him. He flipped through the pages, his expression growing more troubled with each entry. "Where did you get this?" "From the church office," Ethan said evenly. "I admit I had no legal right to take it, but the circumstances were extraordinary. An innocent woman had been driven from her home and livelihood. And the testimony? Do you have these people willing to speak publicly?" "We do," Martha said, though she was not entirely certain about the gambling house owner. But Rosa had agreed when Ethan had stopped to speak with her on the way into town, and Ethan's sister Hannah was already on her way to the sheriff's office, Ethan having sent a boy with a message. As if summoned by the thought, the door opened and Hannah Forrester came in, her face flushed with exertion and determination. She was a pretty woman in her late 20s with Ethan's dark hair and a strong resemblance to her brother in the set of her jaw. "Sheriff," she said, nodding to him, "I am here to give testimony about what I saw 2 months ago. I saw Eleanor Morrison leaving the schoolhouse late one evening, looking guilty. At the time, I thought nothing of it. But in light of what has happened, I believe she was planting that brooch in Miss Finley's desk, planning this scheme even then. Hannah, you should not get involved in this, the sheriff said. but there was little conviction in his voice. "I am already involved," Hannah said firmly. "Miss Finley is the best teacher this town has ever had. My children adore her, and she has helped them more than anyone else ever did. I will not stand by and let her be destroyed by lies." The door opened again, and this time Rosa came in, her dark eyes nervous but resolute. Behind her came two more women, Mary Patterson and Julia Chen, both mothers of children Martha had taught. One by one, they added their voices, speaking of their doubts about Martha's guilt, their belief in her character, their suspicions about Eleanor Morrison. Sheriff Wilcox looked increasingly uncomfortable, caught between the evidence mounting on his desk and the political reality of accusing the mayor's wife. This is a serious accusation. I cannot just arrest Mrs. Morrison on speculation." "It is not speculation," Ethan said. "It is documented evidence and multiple witness testimony. If you do not act on this, Sheriff, we will take it to the territorial marshal, and then you will have to explain why you ran an innocent woman out of town without proper investigation while protecting a thief." The threat hung in the air. Sheriff Wilcox rubbed his face with both hands, looking suddenly old and tired. "All right," he said finally. "I will bring Mrs. Morrison in for questioning. But this better be solid, Forrester, or there will be hell to pay." "It is solid," Ethan said. The confrontation with Eleanor Morrison happened in the sheriff's office an hour later, with half the town gathered outside trying to peer through the windows. Mayor Morrison had come too, blustering and outraged at the accusation against his wife, but his bluster died when he saw the notebook, when he heard the testimony. Eleanor Morrison was a handsome woman in her 40s, always perfectly dressed, always perfectly composed. But as the evidence mounted, her composure cracked. She denied it at first, claimed the notebook was a forgery, but when the sheriff sent a deputy to the Morrison house to search her dressing room and the deputy returned with a hastily hidden stack of bills and a letter from the Tucson gambling house demanding payment, Eleanor finally broke. "I did not want to," she said, tears streaming down her carefully powdered face. "I did not want to hurt anyone, but I owed so much money, and they were threatening to tell Harold, to tell everyone. I thought if I took just a little from the church fund, I could pay them off and replace it before anyone noticed. But it was never enough. They kept demanding more, and then Reverend Sullivan said he was going to audit the books, and I panicked. I thought if everyone believed Miss Finley had stolen the money, no one would look further. I planted the brooch. I spread the rumors. I convinced the others she was guilty. I am sorry. I am so sorry." The apology felt hollow to Martha, standing there watching this woman who had nearly destroyed her life. But there was also pity, because Eleanor Morrison looked utterly broken, her perfect facade shattered beyond repair. Mayor Morrison stood like a statue, his face ashen, as the sheriff placed his wife under arrest. The crowd outside erupted in shocked murmurs when Eleanor was led to the small cell in the back of the office. Constance Whitmore pushed through the crowd, her face red with shame and anger. "Miss Finley," she said, her voice shaking, we wronged you terribly. I believed Eleanor. I should have questioned, should have investigated properly. Please, can you forgive us?" Martha looked at this woman who had led the charge to drive her out of town, who had stood in the schoolhouse doorway and called her a liar and a thief. Part of her wanted to refuse forgiveness, to make them all feel the weight of what they had done. But she thought about Ethan's words by the campfire, about fighting for what was worth saving. And this town, for all its flaws, had been her home, her fresh start. "I can forgive," Martha said slowly, "but I will not forget. What happened here? The rush to judgment, the willingness to believe the worst that should shame all of you. If there is to be any good to come from this, let it be a lesson in justice and fairness." Constance nodded, tears in her eyes, and stepped back into the crowd. Sheriff Wilcox cleared his throat. "Miss Finley, on behalf of the town, I apologize for the wrong done to you. Your position as school teacher is restored if you want it, and there will be restitution for your trouble. I will see to that personally." "I want it," Martha said. "This is my home. I came here to teach, and I intend to continue doing so." A cheer went up from the crowd, and suddenly people were pressing forward, shaking her hand, apologizing, welcoming her back. Hannah hugged her tight, whispering thanks in her ear. Rosa smiled shyly, relieved that her testimony had helped. Even Mr. Hammond, the banker, came forward to apologize for his wife's part in the affair. Through it all, Ethan stood beside Martha, a steady presence, his hand occasionally brushing hers in silent support. When the crowd finally dispersed and Martha was able to return to the schoolhouse, to her small room that someone had thankfully left undisturbed, Ethan helped her carry her trunk back inside. "You did it," he said, setting the trunk down in its old spot. "You are home." "We did it," Martha corrected. "I could never have done this without you, Ethan. Never." He smiled, that transforming smile that made her heart skip. "So what happens now?" "Now I go back to teaching," Martha said. "The children have been without instruction for a week. I need to catch them up. And I need to plan lessons for the rest of the term." "I meant with us," Ethan said softly. "What happens with us?" Martha stepped closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes, close enough to catch the scent of saddle leather and desert sage that clung to him. "I would like there to be an us," she said, "if you are willing to court me properly, to see if what we started out there on the road can grow into something lasting." "I am willing," Ethan said, and then, with a gentleness that made her breath catch, he cupped her face in his calloused hand and kissed her. It was a soft kiss, respectful and sweet, a promise rather than a demand. Martha leaned into it, her hand coming up to rest over his where it touched her cheek, and let herself feel the warmth, the rightness of it. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing a little faster, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I will court you proper," he said. "I will take you to church socials and bring you flowers and ask your permission for every little thing. But I want you to know, Martha Finley, I intend to marry you someday, if you will have me." "Someday," Martha agreed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Let us start with someday." The autumn slipped into winter, and Martha threw herself back into teaching with renewed passion. The children were thrilled to have her back, especially Samuel, who had regressed in his reading during her absence. She started a special tutoring program in the evenings for older students who wanted to learn advanced arithmetic and composition. The town, eager to make amends, donated new books and supplies, more than the little school had ever had. Ethan courted her with old-fashioned dedication. He came to the schoolhouse every Sunday after church to take her for walks around town. He brought her wildflowers in the spring, carefully pressed leaves in the fall. He attended the school spelling bee and cheered loudly when one of Martha's students won. He fixed the leaky roof on the schoolhouse without being asked and built her a new bookshelf for the growing library. On Christmas Eve, 6 months after Martha's return to Agua Caliente, Ethan invited her to have dinner with his sister's family. Hannah had cooked a feast, ham and sweet potatoes and dried apple pie, and the little farmhouse was warm with firelight and laughter. Samuel and his sister Lucy performed a short play they had written about the Nativity, and Martha applauded with genuine delight. After dinner, Ethan asked Martha to step outside with him. The night was cold and clear, the stars brilliant overhead. He took her hand and led her a little way from the house, toward the empty field that stretched behind the barn. "I have been saving," he said, his breath misting in the cold air, "every dollar I could spare. And I talked to a man who owns land about 5 miles east of here. He is willing to sell me 40 acres at a good price. It is not much, but it is a start. Enough for a house and a barn, a pasture for cattle, and, if you were willing, space for a school." Martha's heart began to race. "Ethan, are you saying—" He dropped to one knee right there in the frozen field, holding her hand in both of his. "I am saying I love you, Martha. I have loved you since I saw you standing alone in that schoolhouse, refusing to be broken by injustice. I love your courage and your kindness and the way you believe in those children even when they do not believe in themselves. I want to build a life with you, a home with you. Will you marry me?" There were tears on Martha's cheeks, freezing in the cold air, but she did not care. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with joy. "Yes, Ethan. I will marry you. I love you too. I have loved you since you rode after me on that road, since you believed in me when no one else did. Yes, absolutely yes." He stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with none of the restraint he had shown over the past months. This kiss was hungry and full of promise, a celebration of everything they had overcome and everything they would build together. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, Ethan pulled a small ring from his pocket, a simple silver band with a small turquoise stone. "It was my mother's," he said, sliding it onto her finger where it fit perfectly. "She would have loved you." "I wish I could have met her," Martha said, looking down at the ring, this tangible symbol of the future they would share. They went back inside to share the news with Hannah and her family, and the little house erupted in congratulations and hugs. Hannah cried happy tears and immediately started planning the wedding. Samuel and Lucy danced around the room, delighted that their favorite teacher would officially become their aunt. They were married in the spring, in the same church where Eleanor Morrison had stolen the funds that nearly ruined Martha's life. Reverend Sullivan returned from his travels and, deeply apologetic for being absent during the crisis, performed the ceremony. Nearly the whole town attended, filling the pews to overflowing, eager to celebrate the union and to show their continued support for the couple who had exposed corruption and fought for justice. Martha wore a simple dress of ivory cotton that Hannah had helped her sew, with lace at the collar and cuffs. She carried wildflowers, the same kind Ethan had brought her on their first official walk as a courting couple. Ethan wore his Sunday best, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his eyes bright with love and joy as he watched her walk down the aisle. They spoke their vows in strong, clear voices, promising to love and honor each other, to stand together through whatever trials might come. When Reverend Sullivan pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed Martha with such tenderness that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. The reception was held in the schoolhouse, which seemed fitting given how much of their story had centered on that room. Tables were laden with food that the townspeople had contributed, and someone had brought a fiddle and a guitar, filling the space with music. Martha and Ethan danced their first dance as husband and wife while everyone watched and applauded, and then they were swept up into the celebration, dancing with friends and family, accepting congratulations and best wishes. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Ethan took Martha's hand and led her outside. His horse and a small cart waited there, packed with their belongings. They were spending their wedding night in a small cabin on the land Ethan had purchased, the beginning of their new ranch. The ride to the property was quiet, both of them tired but happy, leaning together on the cart seat. When they arrived, Ethan lifted Martha down and carried her over the threshold of the cabin despite her laughing protests. Inside, a fire was already burning in the small stone fireplace, courtesy of Hannah, who had come earlier to prepare the space. There were blankets on the narrow bed, food in the cupboard, and a bouquet of wildflowers on the rough wooden table. "It is not much yet," Ethan said, looking around the single room that would be their home. "But we will build onto it, make it bigger, make it ours." "It is perfect," Martha said, and she meant it. This rough cabin in the middle of 40 acres of Arizona desert was more home than anywhere she had ever lived, because Ethan was here, because they would build their future together here. That night they made love for the first time, a sweet and gentle joining that sealed their marriage and their commitment to each other. Ethan was patient and tender, attentive to Martha's needs, and she in turn opened herself to him with trust and love. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, talking softly about their plans, their dreams, their hopes. "I want to build the school first," Martha said, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Before we expand the house, before we buy cattle, the school is important." "Then we will build the school first," Ethan agreed, his hand stroking her hair. "We will make it the best little school in the territory, and you will teach, and children will come from miles around to learn from you." "And you will have your ranch," Martha added, Cattle and horses, just like you always wanted." "We will have it together," Ethan said. "Everything together." The first year of their marriage was hard work but filled with joy. They built the schoolhouse first, as promised, a sturdy structure with large windows to let in light and a pot-bellied stove for heat in the winter. Martha opened it in the fall, and families from the surrounding ranches and farms sent their children, grateful for the opportunity for education. She taught during the day and helped Ethan with the ranch in the evenings and on weekends. Ethan worked from dawn to dusk, building fences, digging wells, buying his first cattle with money borrowed from the bank on generous terms, the banker still feeling guilty about his role in Martha's expulsion. The work was backbreaking, but Ethan thrived on it, proud to be building something of his own, something he could pass on to the children he and Martha hoped to have. At night, exhausted but content, they fell into bed together, and their love deepened with each passing day. They learned each other's habits and quirks, the way Ethan liked his coffee black and strong, the way Martha hummed while she graded papers, the way they could communicate with just a look after a long day. 2 years after their wedding, Martha discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with excitement and a little terror, knowing that their lives were about to change in profound ways. Martha continued teaching through the early months of her pregnancy, but as her belly grew, she found it harder to manage the physical demands of the schoolroom. She trained an older student, a bright girl named Abigail, who wanted to become a teacher herself to help with the younger children. Their son was born on a hot summer afternoon, delivered by Hannah, who had experience with such things from helping her neighbors. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Ethan, pacing outside the cabin, feared he might lose Martha. But she was strong, stronger than he had even known, and when he finally heard the baby's cry, his legs nearly gave out with relief. Hannah brought the baby out, cleaned and wrapped in a soft blanket, and placed him in Ethan's arms. "You have a son," she said, beaming, "and Martha is asking for you." Ethan went inside to find his wife pale and exhausted but smiling, her arms reaching for the baby. He placed their son in her embrace and knelt beside the bed, overcome with emotion. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Martha. Thank you for this gift." They named him Thomas, after Martha's father, and from the moment he drew his first breath, he had them both wrapped around his tiny fingers. Ethan was a devoted father, changing diapers and walking the floor with Thomas when he fussed at night, singing off-key lullabies that made Martha smile. Martha marveled at the fierce love she felt for this tiny person, a love that somehow did not diminish what she felt for Ethan, but rather expanded it, as if her heart had grown to accommodate more joy than she had thought possible. Thomas was 2 when their daughter arrived, a quick and easy birth that surprised everyone, including Martha. They named her Rose, and she was a sunny baby with blonde curls and Ethan's gray eyes. Thomas, after an initial bout of jealousy, became fiercely protective of his little sister, following her everywhere once she learned to crawl. The school continued to thrive, with Martha teaching when she could and Abigail taking over more responsibility as she grew older and more confident. The ranch grew too, from those first few head of cattle to a respectable herd, and Ethan hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work. They expanded the cabin, adding 2 bedrooms and a proper kitchen, and built a barn for the horses and a bunkhouse for the hired men. The years passed in a blur of work and love and laughter. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. Rose was wild and free-spirited, always climbing trees and catching lizards and making up elaborate stories. Martha taught them both at home before they were old enough to attend the school, and Ethan taught them to ride and rope and all the practical skills they would need to thrive in this rugged country. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Martha on a picnic to the spot where he had proposed, that empty field behind his sister's farmhouse. Hannah's farm had grown too, and the field was now planted with corn, but the memories were still vivid. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked as they sat on a blanket watching the sun set over the mountains. "Staying here, Marrying me, giving up the chance for an easier life somewhere else? Martha looked at him, at this man who had ridden after her when everyone else had turned away, who had fought for her innocence, who had built a life with her through sheer determination and love. She thought of their children, asleep at Hannah's house where they were spending the night, of the school where she taught children to read and dream, of the ranch they had built together from nothing. Never, she said firmly, not for a single moment. This life, our life, it is everything I ever wanted and more than I dared to hope for. You are everything, Ethan. He kissed her then, a kiss that held 10 years of partnership and passion, of weathering storms and celebrating triumphs together. You saved me, he said when they finally pulled apart. That day I rode after you, I thought I was saving you, but really you saved me. You gave me purpose and love and a reason to build something lasting. I love you, Martha Forrester. I love you too, Martha said, her eyes bright with happy tears, always and forever. They sat together as the stars came out one by one, filling the vast Arizona sky with light. In the distance, a coyote called, and closer they could hear the lowing of their cattle settling for the night. It was the sound of home, of the life they had created against all odds. The following years brought more changes. Thomas, at 15, decided he wanted to attend a school in Tucson to prepare for college, a decision that both terrified and thrilled Martha. She was immensely proud of his ambition and intellect, but the thought of him so far away made her heart ache. Ethan, understanding her feelings, went with Thomas to help him settle in and came back with stories of how confident and capable their son had seemed in the city environment. Rose, at 13, declared she wanted to be a rancher like her father, much to everyone's amusement and admiration. She had no interest in fancy dresses or traditional feminine pursuits, preferring to spend her days riding the range, helping with roundups, learning the business of cattle ranching from Ethan and the ranch hands. Martha worried sometimes that Rose was too wild, too unconventional for society's expectations, but Ethan always laughed and said their daughter was exactly as she should be. The school continued to be Martha's passion. Over the years, she had taught hundreds of children, some of whom went on to become teachers themselves, doctors, lawyers, successful ranchers. Former students would stop by the ranch to visit, bringing their own children, and thank her for instilling in them a love of learning. These visits always filled Martha with profound satisfaction, proof that her work mattered, that she had made a difference in this corner of the world. Eleanor Morrison, the woman whose lies had once nearly destroyed Martha's life, had served 3 years in the territorial prison for embezzlement. Upon her release, she had left Agua Caliente, and Martha had heard through the gossip network that she had gone to California to live with a sister. Mayor Morrison had never quite recovered from the scandal, resigning his position and withdrawing from public life. Martha had felt pity for him, an innocent victim of his wife's deception, but she had not forgotten his initial readiness to believe her guilty. Constance Whitmore, on the other hand, had become one of Martha's staunchest supporters. She had spent years making amends for her role in the expulsion, donating generously to the school, organizing fundraisers for new equipment and books. She and Martha had developed an unexpected friendship, bonded perhaps by the shared understanding of how quickly judgment could be passed and how important it was to seek truth before condemnation. 20 years after that terrible day when Martha had been run out of town, Agua Caliente held a celebration in her honor. The town had grown substantially, now boasting a proper main street with a hotel, several shops, a bank, a church, and 2 saloons. The school Martha had started on her ranch had expanded, with a second building added to accommodate more students, and Abigail, now a grown woman with children of her own, taught alongside her. At the celebration, held in the town square under strings of colorful bunting, the mayor presented Martha with a plaque honoring her 2 decades of service to education in the territory. Students, past and present, gave speeches about how she had changed their lives. Ethan stood beside her, his hand firmly clasping hers, his face glowing with pride. "I never imagined," Martha said when it was her turn to speak, "in when I first came to Agua Caliente as a young woman looking for a fresh start, that this place would become so dear to me. I faced dark times here, times when I thought everything was lost. But I also found love here, profound and lasting love. She turned to look at Ethan, not caring that everyone could see the emotion on her face. I found a partner who believed in me, who fought for me, who built a life with me. I found students who inspired me to be better, to teach better. I found a community that, despite its flaws, ultimately chose justice and truth. This is my home. These are my people, and I am grateful beyond words for every day I have spent here. The crowd erupted in applause, and Martha saw tears on many faces, including Hannah's, Rosa's, even stern Mr. Hammond the banker. Ethan wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her close, whispering in her ear, "You are remarkable, Mrs. Forrester, absolutely remarkable." That night, back at their ranch, they sat on the porch of their much-expanded house, watching the stars appear. Thomas was home from college for the summer, already accepted to a law school back east, full of plans to use his education to help people who could not afford legal representation. Rose was out checking on a mare about to foal, doing the work she loved with skill and dedication. "We built something good here," Ethan said, rocking slowly in his chair, his hand still holding Martha's as it had held it through 2 decades of marriage. "Something that will outlast us." "Yes," Martha agreed, feeling the truth of it in her bones. "Something good." They sat in comfortable silence, these two people who had found each other in the midst of injustice and turned it into love, who had faced down lies and built a life on truth, who had taken 40 acres of empty desert and filled it with purpose and family and hope. The years continued their relentless march forward. Thomas graduated from law school and returned to Arizona, opening a practice in Tucson, but visiting the ranch often, bringing with him eventually a wife, a smart and kind woman named Catherine who taught music. Rose, to everyone's slight surprise, fell in love with one of the ranch hands, a quiet man named David, who matched her passion for the land and the animals. They married in a simple ceremony on the ranch and built a small house on the far edge of the property, working the cattle operation together. Grandchildren arrived, a whole flock of them over the years, filling the ranch with noise and laughter and chaos. Martha taught them all to read, just as she had taught their parents, sitting on the porch with a child on her lap and a primer in her hands, passing on her love of learning to another generation. Ethan taught them to ride and rope, patient and gentle with their mistakes, encouraging their triumphs. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house was full to bursting with children and grandchildren, with Hannah's family and old friends from town. Someone had brought a camera, a modern contraption that Thomas had insisted on, and they took a family photograph. 4 generations standing together in front of the schoolhouse that had started it all. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Martha and Ethan slipped away to the small cabin where they had spent their first night as husband and wife. It still stood, though they used it now for storage, and Ethan had kept it in good repair for sentimental reasons. 40 years, Martha said wonderingly, running her hand over the rough wooden wall. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like a lifetime. It is a lifetime, Ethan said, his hair now silver, his face deeply lined, but his eyes still that same clear gray. A good lifetime, the best one I could have imagined. "Do you remember what you said to me here on our wedding night?" Martha asked, turning to face him. "You said everything together. We have lived up to that, have we not? Everything. Together." "Yes," Ethan said, pulling her into his arms, holding her close the way he had held her through 4 decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle. Everything together, and I would not change a single moment of it. They stood there in the cabin where their married life had begun, 2 people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful, something lasting. Outside, the desert night was cool and clear, the stars brilliant overhead, the same stars that had witnessed the beginning of their story all those years ago. Martha Forrester had come to Agua Caliente seeking a new start, and she had found so much more: a love that had sustained her through every trial, a purpose that had given meaning to her days, a family that had filled her heart to overflowing. She had been run out of town on lies, but a cowboy had ridden after her and brought her back, and in doing so had given her everything she had ever needed. Their story, the story of Martha and Ethan, would be told in Agua Caliente for generations, a reminder that justice could prevail, that love could triumph, and that sometimes the worst moments in life were merely the beginning of the best ones. The school they had built together continued to educate children long after they were gone, a testament to their belief in the power of knowledge and opportunity. The ranch they had carved from desert land prospered under Rose and David's management, and then under their children's management, a legacy of hard work and dedication. And at the end of their days, when they were both old and gray and tired, but still together, still holding hands, still whispering words of love to each other, Martha and Ethan Forrester could look back on their lives with deep satisfaction and profound gratitude. They had run toward each other when the world pushed them apart, had built a life of meaning and purpose, had loved fiercely and well. It was, by any measure, a life well lived, a love well earned, a story worth telling and retelling until the desert itself forgot how to bloom in spring. And in the hearts of their descendants, in the minds of the students Martha had taught, in the very soil of the land they had worked, their love lived on, an enduring testament to what was possible when two people chose each other, believed in each other, and refused to let injustice have the final word. The schoolhouse still stood decades later, preserved as a historical site with a bronze plaque outside telling the story of Martha Finley Forrester, the teacher who was run out of town on lies and brought back by the cowboy who loved her, who together built not just a school or a ranch, but a legacy of justice, education, and enduring love that shaped an entire community for generations to come. Their story was complete, their ending as happy and fulfilling as any love story could hope to be. Proof that even in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the Wild West, love could bloom and thrive and create something beautiful that would last long after the lovers themselves had returned to the dust from which they came. It was a story of redemption and courage, of standing up for truth even when the world chose lies, of finding love in the most unexpected places and nurturing it into something that could withstand any storm. And so, in the small town of Agua Caliente, Arizona, in the final decades of the 19th century and well into the 20th, the name Forrester was spoken with respect and affection, a reminder of what two people could accomplish when they faced injustice together, when they built their dreams side by side, when they chose love over bitterness and hope over despair. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried forward their values, their work ethic, their belief in education and fairness, and the essential goodness that could exist between two people who truly saw each other, truly valued each other, truly loved each other with everything they had. Martha and Ethan Forrester had lived and loved and built something that mattered, and in the end, that was all anyone could ask for, all anyone could hope for, the truest measure of a life well lived and a love well worth fighting for. Their story ended not with tragedy or separation, but with the peaceful satisfaction of two souls who had found their home in each other and made that home a beacon for everyone fortunate enough to know them, to learn from them, to witness the power of love that refused to be defeated by lies, distance, or the passage of time itself.